Good evening. It's great to be here with you again. My name is Cisco Walker. I'm an evangelist here in the beloved International District. I have with me tonight, once again, the pastor of New Life Church of God right here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And tonight, we're going to be talking about Albuquerque, particularly the International District, and how the National Guard plans on coming here to the metro area. And there's a lot of speculation. There's just quite a, to be honest with you, there's a lot of things that we just don't know. It seems like every day we're getting more and more and more information about this subject. But this subject is important to us. Number one, because we live here. Number two, because we're the church and we're trying to be Jesus to the least of these. And number three, because we care about the unhoused and we are not in favor of criminalization of the homeless. And so the fact that the National Guard is coming to the metro area, quite frankly, can be good, but it also raises a lot of concerns, correct?
I would agree. It's one of those things, sometimes the phrasing that we hear, it can shock the conscience, right? We can have images of, a further over-militarized society. And, for me, that's the part that when I first heard about this caused me some concern.
Right. And to be clear, we've heard from Keller, the mayor. We've heard what this is not. This is not going to be anyone with weapons. It's not going to be people wearing fatigues. It's not going to be anyone driving around in military vehicles. They said they're going to have a polo t-shirt.
Yep.
And so I wonder if that polo t-shirt will have Breaking Bad logos on it, or Better Call Saul, call Bell
Yeah.
today. Maybe they'll have
Ring
that
the bell.
on it. But the National Guard will serve as public service aides. They talked about National Guard helping with traffic control, monitoring buses, offering humanitarian services, something about helping out at the Sunport. So, in essence, the National Guard is supposed to help, support, and aid APD. Now, on the surface, that sounds great, right? But what are some of the underlying concerns that you might have as it concerns how the National Guard is going to help support and aid Albuquerque Police Department?
Well, I think, I'm a person that didn't serve in the military, right? So my experience with the scope of what the National Guard does and what it doesn't do is limited. When I hear people or see, guardsmen deployed in some areas after disaster, as part of disaster relief, I think it's a good look, right? Like we have citizen soldiers who have said, hey, I will step up to a call of duty that others have not, and I will make myself available to help in times of crises. And so it's neat to see, National Guard rescuing folks, Coast Guard rescuing folks. But when I first heard about it, I definitely was, my conscience was shocked a bit to imagine how traumatizing it would be to have someone who is functionally a soldier, with or without, a sidearm and automatic weapon, out on the streets, and what kind of danger that puts them in. And, are they going to be dressed in armor and, just different things. I could see them rolling into Tiananmen Square.
Well, if they're public service aides, and to be fair and to be clear, they've said that they're receiving training, which is good. I'm sure they're going to have naloxone training, because one of the reasons they're coming out here is to help with the fentanyl epidemic. So hopefully they'll be trained with naloxone. Hopefully, this is the big thing though, is that this is where the church comes in. This is where the characteristics and the attributes of Christ, and the fact that Christians are able to bear fruit. A person that bears fruit, not all Christians do, but those that bear fruit, they're supposed to have things such as compassion, tolerance, and empathy. And so for the National Guard to come in order for them to work with the unhoused, because I can guarantee you that the unhoused is not going to be happy that they are there. And there's a major portion of people in Albuquerque, like, they don't care that the unhoused is not going to be happy that they are there. It depends on how they act. It depends on a whole lot of things, because one part of the training needs to be that people need to realize that by and large they're going to be dealing with people who are nonconformists, right? By and large, the unhoused and those who are on drugs, you're going to be dealing with people. They don't like authority, they don't like the police department, and they probably don't really care for the military. They don't really care for this country. They're not really concerned. Some of them will. I talked to Veterans Sunday, going out with Intercede. But by and large, Pastor Chuck, or the Pope of the International District, he's right. There's a lot of youngsters out there, and youngsters that are out there, these kids that are out there, they're nonconformists. They're not in faith. They don't really like the police department. But even in my notes here, I thought about not liking the police department. Some of them may not have a problem with APD, because the APD that is serving now in the war zone is not the same APD that was serving when you and I were running around up there. Because when you and I were running around up there, it was rowdy brown shirts. They were cracking skulls. They were pulling people over. They were taking you to jail. But now, maybe they're not afraid of APD anymore. What do you think?
Well, I think you addressed a really wide range of subjects. What we're seeing in part, I would liken to a general apathy from the church and a lack of compassion. The reason that we have the National Guard coming in to, do some of these things is in large part they are filling the role that the church has largely abandoned.
Yeah, but true, but the church has been out there for 10, 15 years. So they have failed, but they've been there, but maybe they've lacked the compassion and empathy. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. I think a lot of ministry are like, hey, you need to stop doing this now. You came to a revival. Why are you still sinning? Right? Like, the revival was yesterday. Why are you still sinning? So there's really no easy fix. Like, why do we have unhoused people? The reason we have unhoused people is because they don't have houses to live in. Now, how they ended up there are compounded issues, right? It's not one simple thing. It's not an easy fix. There's mental health issues. There's substance abuse issues. You mentioned nonconformism, but to some degree, those who are unhoused are in large part living as humans have lived for the better part of our existence.
Yeah.
Like, cities and police departments are relatively new compared to living, outside in a tent, rudimentary housing without running water.
Yeah.
So, are they conforming? I think they would conform if they had the means to do so, and if it wasn't terribly restrictive for folks to conform. But like, if you want to live in a house, you have to come up with the cost for housing one way or another, and that's where people struggle. So I think there's a lot of different elements there to explore.
Yeah, because some of the things that I've seen from these press conferences is that the National Guard is going to be guarding individuals at hospitals, helping APD with traffic accidents, everything from a civilian helping from a car accident to a snapped power line. But if you're going to be helping people, guarding individuals at the hospital like that, now you're starting to get into like possibly some dangerous territory, right?
There's a fellow that
Because like APD has like a hard time like guarding people at hospitals. They have firearms. They're trained. APD has a very difficult job to do. So like it's not going to be just as easy as I think everybody thinks it's going to be.
I think the point that you're making, and I don't disagree, is that it's hard to go from soldier to social worker.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can make that jump easily. And I think that, as you described, some of those circumstances are going to be problematic. I'll use one example. There's a individual that I have ministered to now for the better part of a year, who last year had some really challenging behavioral issues, substance use, mental health issues. This individual ended up arrested and hospitalized, and I managed to track down the hospital that the individual was in, and APD was there guarding them because they were handcuffed to the bed, couldn't leave, because they were, for all intents and purposes, detained.
Yeah.
And so they were in the hospital because it was the stop before they went to MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center, here in Bernalillo County. And the APD officer was kind enough. I told them who I was, gave them my bona fides. I pastor this church. This is an individual that attends our church, and they gave me 10, 15 minutes with the individual, not really like all up in my business. They let me do some social work stuff that we do. And I think, by and large, a service member might be able to fill that same role. Like if that's the guarding in the hospital, like, okay, you are in custody, we're going to move you from here to the bathroom, this is how we're going to do it. Are they armed? I don't think anybody wants gunshots going off in a hospital, period.
Yeah,
ever.
no, yeah. Well, I'm not a big gun person.
I don't do guns.
I'm not a big gun person because I'm unstable. I have problems with mental health. Like, I don't need guns lying around. So I'm not a big gun person. But, like, no, you don't really want guns in the hospital. But it does bring up, it does bring up a lot of, and I'm not saying that, like, I'm not saying that like the help isn't needed. I think the problem that we have right now is like we just don't know. All we have are what's been laid out.
Yep.
What's what we've heard, and that's kind of why we're like having like we're kind of like talking about all this. Because the National Guard stepping in to gain control of Central Avenue, like that. That's a big deal. Some people they see this as a parody of like Police Academy, right? Like Citizens on Patrol. You remember the movie with Bobcat Goldthwait, right?
Yep,
Some people think it's a joke.
Yep.
Some people think like, well, why can't APD do the job? Well, why, like you said, why now? Like, why are they coming now? Why haven't they been doing these things? Why haven't they been taking care of it? Like, it's gotten this far out of line, so now we've got to go to these extreme measures to pull it back into socket because Harold Medina is like, we just don't have enough time, and with the National Guard coming in, now we can focus on policing people. Now we can put more attention to cleaning up the streets, but like, how did they get that way to begin with?
Yep. Well,
big problems.
Huge problem. Like it certainly is out of control. Like and I'm not picking on unhoused. Like the idea, if the argument is there is a virtually unrestricted number of people that are unhoused without any place to go or live for whatever reason it is, there are no social services that you can force someone to participate in.
Yeah.
And so when you have, this is the challenge with policing, right? There are instances where you don't need a police officer to make a situation worse, right? Because there may not necessarily be a crime in the process or being committed, but you have someone who has some sort of mental health need that is unaddressed and possibly unassessed. And so that's where the Albuquerque Community Safety comes in, and I think that was certainly a positive step in the right direction.
Yes.
But I think there are just so many unhoused, because everybody has rights. The unhoused have rights to exist, but the business owners have rights to have their customers not afraid to come into the store. Now, is it the government's job to make sure a business can make money? It's a different question. But if it's a community safety issue, I can see how asking for additional resources is helpful. One of the things that feeds into this is that there are limited places that people can camp. Now, the reason people sleep on sidewalks, this is a thing that a lot of people just don't put two and two together. You can be trespassed for sleeping on private property, but a sidewalk is not private property, it's public property. And unless there is a no camping ordinance on public property, you can't really stop people from camping on public property. Now, no camping ordinances are kind of draconian, right? They're not great, but you have this, it's an unsolvable problem that I don't know that the National Guard is going to be able to fix.
Yeah, because and I'm glad that you brought that up, because first of all, a lot of unhoused people or people that are individuals who are struggling with substance abuse. When I worked at God's Warehouse, we heard this all the time. Oh, there's no resources out there. There's nothing out there for me. But I worked with a lady at God's Warehouse, and she would immediately stop that, and she would tell people, no, you know what? There's a lot of resources for you. There's this place, there's this place, there's this place, there's this place. And that girl, Laura Trevino, Laura would sit down with people and she would say, let's call this place right now. Let's get a hold of these people. Let's get, and a lot of times people would be like, oh, no, wait, well, I'm just not right. Oh, and they would just almost run out the door. Yep. So there's a lot of resources, and a lot of the unhoused, they play that card well, there's just nothing for me here. But no, there are a lot of resources, because there's a lot of Albuquerque just got millions and millions of dollars dumped into it for the fentanyl problem, for how can we make the situation better. And so I'm glad you talked about this, but being an advocate, so to speak, for a homeless person, like you said, where does the 8th Amendment fall into this? Where does the 14th Amendment fall into this? National Guard coming in, is it legal? Those things are important, because if they're going to be patrolling Central Avenue and somebody's smoking fentanyl, then you got to search that person for fentanyl. You got to search that person. So there's going to be a lot of hoops that are going to have to be jumped through in order to make it effective, because you can't just go around searching people. You can't just go around shaking people down.
No, you have.
But there is the possibility that could happen, and I think that if I was a homeless person, I'd be kind of leery of that.
There are civil rights attorneys that would have an absolute field day
love it.
with that,
and so win big lawsuits.
Yeah, they would. So I don't think I don't think they are deputized, right? So they are being deployed. And let me just preface this: when this first came out, I was like, oh my gosh. Then as more clarifying information has come out, people have had a chance to explain the process a little bit, I feel less apprehensive about it than I did before. But unless they are deputized by state police for general jurisdiction, or APD for jurisdiction within Albuquerque Police Department, they are not going to have the power to detain anyone, and they are not going to have the power to search anyone.
Yeah.
Like that, and should that happen, I cannot imagine that there would be any sort of way that they could rationally justify that kind of behavior. Simply put, there's they would have to be deputized. They would have to be commissioned as an officer, and that is more than just like, well, I'm gonna make you an honorary deputy, right?
Yeah, it's not like
go out on patrol.
Tombstone or Young Guns, right? Yeah, you're talking about like the real process of doing that.
Well, so here's a parallel. So there's a person that I know, pastors a church. During COVID, when things were shut down, this person got together with the sheriff of their county, and they deputized members of their church so that they could gather together. So not for the purpose of like necessarily worshiping, but for the purpose of thumbing their nose at the governor's order.
To the government, yeah.
You know, and like at Freedom Worship Center, the church I was pastoring, we figured it out. Our church grew, our finances were stable, we did fine during COVID. We figured out unique and creative ways to minister. But this particular church, you know, they deputized some of their congregants, and then state police showed up there, and they were like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And they're like, "Oh, we're not meeting for church. It's deputies coming to a meeting of it's police business." And so, like, that same sort of thing isn't going to fly. Like that, it didn't fly there, and it's not going to fly out on the street. Like, they're not going to be deputized like that. I cannot imagine.
No, and I don't think they will. But I think that it's like with everything. You're going to have National Guard people that really want to help people, and then you're going to have some people that just want to stick it to people. You know, because you know what? We've worked in the fentanyl epidemic. We've volunteered in the fentanyl epidemic almost going on 3 years. And I'll tell you what, it will eat you up. It will drive you nuts. It will test you. It will try you. And I'm talking about people that really have the love of God shed abroad in their hearts. And it can be very challenging, very difficult. So all I'm saying is that this training or whatever, the National Guard, whatever they're being prepared for, I've never seen anything like what's going on Central Avenue, because the crosshairs really for this cleanup and all this stuff, the crosshairs really are on Central Avenue. That's what I believe. They want Central Avenue to be a pristine jewel, and they want they want Central Avenue cleaned up. They want to keep it clean, and they want to keep it clean for reasons that probably don't really have much concern about the unhoused. Let's move them out of the way, at least get them off Central Avenue. Yeah. That is a controversial statement, but I'm not the only one that has that opinion. What is your opinion of that?
You know, I think
you're an optimist, but I mean,
treating people wrongly would be that attempt as gentrification. So gentrification, you take like places like Harlem.
Yeah,
right?
We
Harlem,
talked about it here.
You know, a traditionally, you know, a neighborhood that has had all kinds of issues because of race and because of other things. You know, people get crowded to one space. Hell's Kitchen, another place now. Clinton, right? New York, Hell's Kitchen is it's also called. You know, poor Irish in Hell's Kitchen. Historically African American population in Harlem. Now, once they started to gentrify those parts of the city, they economically forced people out, and that's never okay.
No, but it happens all the time.
It happens all the time. And so if their approach is for gentrification, I have to oppose that argument.
Yeah, but they're not going to come right out and say that.
No, I don't think they will.
But a lot of people feel that, and I talk with a lot of unhoused people, right? And a lot of unhoused people, like, they feel that, like, that could be the storm brewing. I don't know.
You know, I avoid Central. I avoid Central because I don't want to hit somebody. Yeah. Right? Like there are reasons that, I mean, I don't have any business there
all the time.
You know, I don't like the places that I go aren't necessarily there. I work downtown, run into a lot of people downtown, but I'm usually walking, right? And so, but I personally have seen more than one decedent in the street on Central.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I personally am terrified of being involved in that sort of thing. And people can say, well, have faith, don't have fear. Look, I don't want to hit someone with my car.
And I talked to, and he won't mind me talking about this, but I talked to Pastor Chuck Aragon at God's Warehouse, the Pope of the International District. I talked to Pastor Chuck, and Pastor Chuck said that Central Avenue is pretty much cleaned up. They put a pretty good dent in what's going on Central Avenue. And what's going on Central Avenue, all of us know: fentanyl, violent crime, prostitution, loitering, all the whole gamut is there, right? And Pastor Chuck thinks and believes that downtown needs to be the focus with National Guard as well. He says because he feels that people need to be able to go downtown to eat, conduct business. I was driving to, I just do the day labor. I do idiot work. I was driving down to on a work ticket that I had, and I went by the chemo, and there was some lady that was like completely naked, just screaming. So like downtown is a problem. But Pastor Chuck and many others, and you have some insight on this because you're down there all the time. So what kind of condition is downtown in, and could National Guard be a blessing there, or a stepping stone for something maybe better in the future?
Yeah, downtown is in virtually the exact same set of circumstances with a different economic scale. So the building that I work in, I work right by the convention center, and we have folks that camp all around the building. They camp next to the railroad tracks. They camp under the bridge at the railroad tracks. There's there's a tunnel that goes under the tracks by where I work. I'm off Central a bit. I regularly step over puddles of urine and fecal matter. I have picked up all kinds of needles. I've stepped over feces in the parking lot of our office.
Well, that's just 505. That's just an Albuquerque thing now.
Well, but I mean, so you could say the same about...
We're just desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, folks are going to live where they can.
Yeah.
And so downtown, you'll notice that there's not a lot of places that have an alcove or an overhang or a street that isn't regularly, tread by pedestrians. And, those offices and places that have security guards, there's not a whole lot of people camping around those specific properties.
It's down on Iron, Steel Bridge.
Yep.
That area is packed. And then there's the other one that's down there by the toolbox. That area by First and Lomas.
I'm literally right in between both of those.
Yeah, and
I have one to my south, one to my north.
And this was a year ago, but a year ago when we would go down to do surveys for God's Warehouse, I noticed that, and others noticed as well, that the attitude and the demeanor of the unhoused downtown, it was very violent. It was a lot more different than it was, say, on Central Avenue. They're all dangerous, but there's different dynamics that play into being downtown versus being up, like where I live and where others are.
A few weeks ago, I guess this is about 2.5 months ago now, a person was under the influence and literally fell off the parapet that parallels the street right next to where my office is. They fell down about 10 feet, and I wheeled my vehicle around and stopped traffic. Someone else stopped, and we offered multiple times to help the individual stand up.
Yeah.
They, didn't want any help. They're literally laying in the street. And so for the sake of safety, because I watch people drive on that road, and there's a speed limit, and people don't come anywhere near paying attention.
Yeah.
And so I called 311.
How long did you wait?
I didn't wait. I went around the corner, and because the person was rather adamant about wanting to be left alone, and I'm going to respect somebody's desire.
But I mean, how long did it take to get 311 to answer?
Not long.
5 minutes?
No, they answer pretty quick.
Depends what time of day it is. Yeah.
This was after 5, and I don't know whatever happened with that individual, but it's hard to see people so broken that any kind of help is not wanted.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's overwhelming. It's almost it's unfathomable. But yet, like that. This is why we're talking about these things, because all of us, for the most part, even if you don't live in the International District, you have to cross it. You have to go downtown. If you're going to live in Albuquerque right now in 2025, April 15th, if you're going to live in the metro area, if you're going to live in Albuquerque, you're going to have unhoused, you're going to have urine, you're going to have feces, you're going to have fentanyl use, you're going to run into all of that. And if you can't handle those things, then you're just going to be completely miserable, and you probably shouldn't live here, because that is what we're dealing with now. So therefore, that is why the politicians and Grisham and Keller, and that's why they want to bring the National Guard in to try to clean up these areas. And like we said earlier, the crosshairs are on Central Avenue. I believe the crosshairs will probably be to some degree on downtown, because I've seen Keller downtown, and I've seen Medina downtown on interviews, and I've seen Grisham downtown. But you know what? Just because you can't see people on Central Avenue anymore, it doesn't mean that the problem has gone away. And that's what's happened in the past, right? It's get everybody off of Balloon Fiesta. We get everybody off of Central Avenue, and all of a sudden, oh, hey, we've done it. We've cleaned it up. No, you haven't. People have gone 4 blocks that way, 3 blocks that way. You haven't cleaned it up. That happens all the time, right? That happens in California. It happens in Oregon. It happens in all these other states. Seattle, right? Just because you can't see the people anymore in these hot spots, it doesn't mean that you've met their need. It doesn't mean that you've solved the problem.
Yeah, and one of the things that we discussed, meeting the need is accepting the help, right? You can't force someone to accept the help. But ultimately,
but then, okay, I'm sorry, but then they have this hard knocks attitude that they had 2 months ago. You either get help or you go to jail. So it's you either accept the help or we're going to lock you up. And I don't believe that works either. And I don't believe they have the room to lock everybody up.
Yeah, I don't think any of it that we've tried up to this point is working. A person has to, it's a thing that I say all the time. I can't want it more than you do. If this is how you want to live, I can't want it more than you do. But at some point in time, there are ultimately consequences for decisions that people make, good or bad. Each decision comes with, at some point, a consequence. And that's sort of the challenge that I think we're facing is you've got some in the city that are saying, we've got to just keep trying. And you've got others in the city that are saying, well, we've tried, they're not interested, they got to go.
And we got people in the church that have that attitude, right? Because one question we have to ask with National Guard is where is the church in all of this, right? Because you look at church history, you look at the past, you look at the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire they didn't want anything to do with vagrants. They didn't want anything to do with the weak, with the downtrodden. They were done. They were scum. They were cast out. But the church would come and meet the need. The church would be Jesus to the least of these, right? The church would provide, would clothe the naked, would feed the hungry, would give water to the thirsty, would visit those in prison. And Roman citizens would, and others, Greeks, they would marvel at the compassion and the empathy that the church had for the downtrodden. But now you have people in the church that are like, I've seen it. I've been out with ministries in the last 3 years, and I've seen church people treat people terribly out there on the streets. Mm-hmm. And so, like, and I know you've seen some of it, and you've heard about that, and that is terrible, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, we have an exasperated church, right? Now, the church has had every opportunity. The priest and the Levite had every opportunity to help the man in the ditch. If you've ever heard somebody say, well, you know, if such and such or this and that, what I would do is, well, you're seeing what people would do, right? Like people say, oh, if there was this kind of crisis, I'll tell you what I would do. Well, this is what they would do. And in many cases, it's nothing.
Yeah.
And well, they're doing what they want to do. Like the lack of action is the desired position, and that's why in these instances people aren't doing anything.
Yeah. And the National Guard coming in to deal with the unhoused, to deal with fentanyl, right? Prostitution, loitering, mentally deranged, mental illness. You can call it mentally deranged. Some of the people I've seen, they are suffering clearly from mental illness. Psychosis. You know, I've seen unbelievable things, but you know, there are some people, and I actually heard this from a real person. You know, they said things like this. You know, if APD or if the National Guard would show more force, then the unhoused would get the message and it would get it across.
What's the message?
Well, that's the whole thing, right? Like you know, they want this brute iron fist to, you know, make an example. You know, just start hitting a little harder. Just start digging down a little bit more. Just start, you know, and like people really believe that. These two, I was in a church. I preached in a church, and these two old timers, they come up to me and they reminded me of those two old men in the Muppets. Remember the ones that sit in the balcony?
Yeah, and complain about everything.
Yeah, and so like I'm leaving because I see them, and they know that you know that me and my wife that we live here, and that we try to help ministries, and I sing, and you know, all the whatever. And so like I'm trying to get away from them because like I know what they're gonna ask, and I know that you know but these two guys, they come up and they say, hey, is Albuquerque getting cleaned up since Trump's been elected into office? You know, because Trump's going to clean up Albuquerque and he's going to run all this riffraff out of here once and for all. And like, but you know what? It's sad, but you'd be surprised how many people have that attitude, and you'd be surprised how many people salivate for that. Oh, they love that and they want that so bad, you know. And I just felt kind of bad, you know, and I didn't even really know how to answer him. You know, I don't really recall if I gave him an answer, but I knew it was coming, you know. And you know, there's a lot of people that feel that way too, you know. They just have no tolerance whatsoever at all, because they don't see people as people.
Yep.
They see them as burdens, problems. So what are we supposed to do?
You know, the cycle of politics is that the pendulum goes back and forth.
Yeah.
And you know, some have made the argument that overreacting is what Americans do best.
Well, that's accurate. Yeah.
We have no way as a people to stay the course because rebellion is in our blood. And so whatever the status quo is, we don't like it. We're those two old men. Whatever it is, I'm fed up and I've had it up to here. And I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on, when the other party's in power, that's what you say.
Yeah.
And so the pendulum goes back and forth, and we don't really get coherent solutions. What we get are reactions that are often disproportionate.
Yeah. you know, and you know, with all this stuff going on, you know, we talked about the money. There was a lot of money that has been flooded into the community, and rightly so, because these kind of problems require a lot of money to fix them, to find people housing. And you know, you have to look at this stuff, you have to study this stuff, you have to research it. There's a cost to try to even to begin to remotely understand what it takes. And most people, they're like, well, look at that building over there, we can take that building, why can't they just take that building over there and put 30 people in there? They don't realize, you know, there's fire hazards, there's a code, there's all, you know, there's all kinds of red tape, you know. Well, look at that piece of property over there, just let 600 people camp out over. Is that what you're going to start telling people next? Like where they can camp, where they can go? Do they have to go to a certain, you got to be real careful with this stuff, because if you're not careful with it, it can turn into something that can be diabolical. I really believe that.
No, you're not wrong.
And I'm not, you know, I'm not sitting here saying, you know, and we can make these statements because, like, we live in it. We see it every day, and that's why I made that statement. Like, if you're going to live in 505, if you're going to live in Albuquerque, and if you're going to live in the international, if you're going to live anywhere close to the international district, you're going to have to be able to deal with all of that stuff, because if you can't, then you're going to be miserable. Don't come or get out. And a lot of people are getting out.
Yeah.
They don't want to deal with it. They've dealt with it, and they're leaving. The businesses are leaving. People are leaving. They don't want to stay here anymore. They don't want to rent anymore because they don't want to deal with it. And like, there's a certain part of that if we're honest with ourselves, and if you've been in that position, you can't blame people for that.
Yep.
And it's a terrible thing to have to say and to admit, but yet it is true to some degree.
Yeah. You know, people buy a piece of property or start a business with the intent of being able to provide for their family. And when that ability for them to thrive because someone else is spiraling, and it feels like the government who's charged with fixing that stuff, when they don't appear to do anything, it can certainly feel hopeless.
Yeah.
Right? Like I've worked downtown since I guess 2019 in different roles, and I used to enjoy going to the original Garcia's Kitchen there on 4th Street. It's been closed now because of the family didn't want to deal, the business itself didn't want to deal with
Andy,
the homeless challenges that people camping out.
Well, people going into the bathroom and smoking fentanyl.
And we had that happen at the church.
Yeah. I remember there was a guy smoking. We were having a band. We were having a music rehearsal one time, and the guy was smoking it right there in the pew. So. But the grant money, the bureaucracy, the unhoused, and the fentanyl and prostitution, all these horrible things, like, they create a lot of jobs and a lot of security for people who are involved, right? And one of the reasons that I felt like I wanted to get out of that type of work, and I didn't do it very long, to be honest with you, I'm lazy, man. I'm a rebel to begin with anyway. But one of the reasons I didn't do it for very long was because I wondered how many, and this is probably stupid, but I wondered with this quasi like social work and stuff, I kind of wondered, like, do people really want these people to get better, or because what are people going to do? Like, I know, like, we're never going to solve the problem, right? But people feel let down, right? Taxpayers, people that there's a lot of good people. I have them in my family. There's a lot of good people. They love Albuquerque. They came here. They loved it for years, and they're seeing it being systematically destroyed because of the drugs and the prostitution and the apathy, and just see, it's depressing, to see businesses boarded up, closed up. I remember going into stores a year ago by where we live in our apartment. Now they've got boards on them. now people are breaking into them. Some of them have been burned down with either intentionally or unintentionally. I drive to work in the morning and I go by El Mesquite, that Circle K, and but it's sad, and I see people that are, the thing now is it just, you just take your coat off and just throw it down on the concrete and just start a fire with it, and it burns out quick. But sometimes it'll burn your building down. And so these things can be overwhelming. And one thing is the church that we have to always be cognizant of is you can't harden your heart to these things, because you can see these things so much that you can just get to the point where you're like, well, that's just kind of how it is. It's always been that way, and that's kind of dangerous too.
Most assuredly.
But like an EMT gets like that, APD gets like that.
Sure.
Will the National Guard get like that? They're not above that.
Well, there's limits on how long they can be deployed. So,
well, how long do you think they'll be here?
Don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. Some of those individuals are not full-time soldiers. Right.
Yeah.
So there are times that, they're going to be pushing the edge of what's allowed. The governor just signed into law that National Guardsmen, National Guard personnel, service personnel, can have an extension on the amount of paid leave that they get. And after that certain point, state employees, and after that point, they have to take, annual leave, sick leave, any kind of, or leave without pay. You said something a moment ago that I think is the underpinning behind all of this, and that's, do we want them to get better, right? I'm not picking sides. I'm not making a political argument one way or another, but it is a form of explanation to understand those two men saying, well, have things gotten cleaned up? Because
and they see Trump as the one that's doing
totally, and I'm not, that's why I prefaced it. I'm not picking sides. I'm not saying good or not good, because I don't agree with a lot of the things that I see, but there are some of the things that I'm like, there's a good point there. But if, for example, what we have been doing was helping people get better, then more people would be better. It's the same argument that you make for the church, who has closed doors to people. If what you are doing is advancing the gospel, then you will have more people who are coming into your church. But you don't have more people that are coming into your church. You have a revival, and the only people that come to your church are the people that are already saved. They just want to yell, hoot, and holler.
Yeah, I'm tired of that. That's why I don't go to those anymore.
Yeah, and so
I waste my time with that.
This is the same thing. If what we've been doing was effective, people would be better, but it doesn't appear that folks are better. It appears that it is worse. Now, it's worse because there's more people. It's worse because there are, it's easy to make some of these drugs, right? It's not like meth. Like I've cooked meth in my life, and it's not an easy process. Like, you have to measure things and things, but a lot of this digestive sluice that they're putting together is like, just put a little of this, put a little bit of that. Hey, we got some of this extra, great, throw it in there. And they're pressing these pills, and they're just cranking them out. And so it's concerning, because people aren't going to get better on either one of these approaches. They're not going to get better with more militarized police. They're not going to get better by having free reign to do whatever they want. Neither one of those is helping people get better.
And there was a quote of the business owner, and this is his quote. Because a lot of people are wondering, myself included, what is the real motivation for this crackdown and this cleanup, right? And this one man he likened the National Guard coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico. He likened this to the, quote, lipstick on the pig. That's kind of interesting. I mean, maybe he was from the South. Maybe he was in a. That's not something a native New Mexican would say.
Nope.
But he has a point of that. You know, is this just the lipstick on the pig?
Can't make a pig's purse. Can't
Yeah.
make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
Yeah, you know, is the National Guard coming? Is it just a velvet bone, right? Is it just a bone covered with velvet, right? And you know, the lipstick on the pig. This is a vicious critique of the Operation Cleanup and the National Guard's deployment. You know, and so like, what is the real motivation behind this? Many people believe that it's money. Many
Yep.
people believe that it's the Route 66 Centennial, and that will generate thousands and thousands of dollars for the state of New Mexico, because the crosshairs are on Central Avenue, and there's a reason for the crosshairs to be on Central Avenue. But of all the places, but like I said earlier, just because you get everybody off of Central Avenue, it doesn't mean that you've solved the problem. You know what, people in like, where do we expect people to go?
Yep. Yeah. Some of it is politics. Some of it is optics. Some of it, you know, this is always a criticism for a lame duck executive.
All right.
And lame duck meaning a president is termed out after 2 terms. In New Mexico, a governor is termed out after 2 terms. And so this governor is not running for office again. And so this governor can do relatively whatever they want to with very little consequence. And if nothing else, it serves as an appeasement for those middle of the road voters who might be swayed for whatever candidate this governor endorses the next cycle. So
yeah, well,
this is not something that would have probably gotten the governor reelected 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, it from what I understand, it's going to be Keller and Brigman, right?
There's a lot of people. Deb Haaland is another one that, you know, is running. I don't know who's running on the Republican ticket.
And there's still time.
But
I think
almost 2 years.
as people who live in this city, minister in this city, work in this city, like, we need to really see what these politicians, what are their policies, like, what do they want to do, how do they want to tackle these problems, because I think that's important.
Yep.
And I am not I am the dumbest political person that's ever come down the pike. You know, I got a D in American government at Lee College, you know. So I'm not like, but I know that where I live, in the state that I live in the community that I live in, I'm learning the hard way that we need to know what's going on out there. So, as we have closing thoughts, the lipstick on the pig, Route 66 Centennial, the National Guard is coming here to the metro area. I think all we can do is wait and see, right?
Yep.
What else can we really do? And
Yep.
pray.
Pray is what we can do.
And pray, because you know what, this might be the answer to somebody's prayers. Maybe
Yeah.
who knows? You know, we Christians are really bad about that, with that Elijah syndrome. You know, like, I'm the only one that prays. I'm the only one that's asked for the community. No, there's been people praying for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years about how to solve some of these problems and how to solve some of these dilemmas. So, just, you know, watch with us and wait with us, and we'll see what's going to happen, right?
Yep.
You have anything to add at the end here?
Yeah, you know, I am optimistic. As you say, I tend to be an optimist. I'm a very pessimistic optimist, but I do think that a polo is going to do more than a patrol car will. And I think that even Albuquerque Community Safety, they are so police adjacent that it is difficult for the unhoused to extend any sort of trust because of the risk of being arrested. And so I think that if there are National Guard's troops and they are working toward a shared goal, not necessarily gentrification, but the shared goal of reducing human suffering, because that's what motivates New Life as a church. That's what we stand for. If we're able to see some of that move forward, then I think for as rocky of a start as this may have had, its end will ultimately be good. But if we don't see that, if the polos are not more effective than the patrol car, then I think we're looking at a really long haul with a lot of broken people for some time to come.
Yeah. I want to know if the polo is going to have the Breaking Bad emblem on it like Grisham's had when she did the press conference.
Yeesh.
With Walter White, wearing the Walter White, clean up my territory, right? You can't make that up, right?
No. But
So,
what's more New Mexico?
we'll
than that?
we'll end it with satire. We'll end it on a sardonic note. We've been talking tonight about the National Guard coming to Albuquerque, and we hope that you have enjoyed it, and we hope that you will continue to follow anything you can get a hold of, and leave something in the comments. Come out to New Life Church, worship with us, pray with us, and help us to make a difference in the International District. We love you. God bless you. Good night.
Good night. Don't forget to like and subscribe.